Chapter 2. Although he could see through the terrified spectre floating right in front of him, Scrooge was certain it was Marley. Marley's face looked the same as it had in the coffin 7 years earlier, with the bandage wrapped the long way around his face. A lengthy phantom chain was tied around his waist, and attached to it were the huge cash boxes, keys, padlocks, ledgers, and other objects that had seemed so important to him in life. Much like Scrooge, Jacob Marley had cared little for anything other than money when he was among the living. Now all the objects associated with earning money were his permanent burden. "How now?" Scrooge called to him. "What do you want with me?" "Much," the giant ghost said, drawing the single word out into a long, guttural call that echoed through the room. Scrooge tried to mask his fear and demanded, "Who are you?" The ghost was facing him, but his eyes were wild and unfocused. "Ask me who I was," he instructed. "Who were you then?" Scrooge asked, sounding a bit angry when he did. The apparition floated a little closer, and Scrooge tried not to tremble. "In life, I was your partner, Jacob Marley." "Can you sit down?" Scrooge asked. "I can," the ghost answered. Scrooge didn't believe him. He could see right through the spectre's body to the buttons on the back of his coat. "Do it then," Scrooge ordered. Marley shrunk down to nearly normal size and lowered himself into a chair on the opposite side of the fireplace. As he did, his phantom chains clanged loudly. It unnerved Scrooge that he could see right through this being. Even though the ghost was sitting, Ebenezer could still clearly see the chair he was sitting in. "You don't believe in me," the ghost said, his hair and clothes floating as if they were being blown by some phantom wind or were in some deep, unseen water. "I don't," Scrooge insisted. "Why do you doubt your senses?" "Because the littlest thing can affect them," Scrooge explained. "A slight disorder of the stomach can make them cheat. You may be an undigested bit of beef. You may be an undigested bit of beet, a blot of mustard, a crumb of cheese, a fragment of underdone potato." He adjusted himself in his seat and stared right at the ghost. "There's more of gravy than of grave about you, whatever you are." Marley's ghost suddenly started growing and growing until he was giant once again. As he grew, he rattled his chains and let out a frightful cry. "Ah!" Scrooge's bravado immediately vanished. He realized that he was in the presence of his former partner, and there was no place he could run or hide. Terrified, Scrooge fell to his knees and pleaded, "Dreadful apparition, why do you trouble me?" The creature looked down at him. "Man of worldly mind, do you believe in me or not?" I do," Scrooge replied, nodding and trembling at the same time. "But why do spirits walk the earth? And why do they come to me?" The spirit wafted in the air, floating back and forth ever so slightly. "It is required of every man that the spirit within him should walk among his fellow men and travel far and wide." Marley stared directly into Scrooge's eyes. "And if that spirit goes forth not in life, it is condemned to do so after death. It is doomed to wander through the world and witness what it might have shared on earth, and turn to happiness." Because he had not cared about his fellow man in life, he was forced to do so after death. Just saying the words made Marley's misery that much worse. and he let loose a terrifying wail that rattled his chains. "You are fettered in chains," Scrooge said. "Why?" Marley's ghost shook his head mournfully. "I wear the chain I forged in life. I made it link by link, yard by yard. Do you recognize the pattern?" The ghost held up a length of chain for Scrooge to examine. Trembling, Ebenezer looked at it and shook his head no. He quickly realized the chain was the physical representation of human greed. Marley's chains were great in number because of the selfish way he lived his life. "Can you imagine the weight and length of the chain you bear?" Marley questioned. "It was as heavy and as long as this 7 Christmas Eves ago. Yours is a ponderous chain." Scrooge turned and scanned the floor, almost expecting to suddenly find a ghostly chain connected to him. Although he was scared of Marley's ghost, he realized an even greater fear was growing inside him, the fear of what might await him in death. "Jacob," he implored the spirit, "tell me more. Speak comfort to me." Marley's wild eyes focused and burned into Scrooge's. "I have none to give," he intoned, as he slowly began to float away in the air. "I cannot stay. I cannot linger anywhere. Mark me. In life my spirit never walked beyond our counting house, never roved beyond the narrow limits of our money-changing hole. Now endless journeys lie before me." Scrooge reached toward him and pleaded. 7 years dead? And traveling the whole time?" "The whole time. No rest, no peace," Marley replied. "I was blind, and could not see. My whole life squandered and misused. Oh, woe is me." Scrooge was confused. Nothing about Marley's life seemed misused to him. "But you were always a good man of business." "Business!" Marley bellowed so violently that the bandage snapped, causing his entire jaw to fall off. Scrooge reeled back from the horrible sight of Marley's chin dangling from a ghostly string of bone, making his mouth a gaping hideous hole. When Marley tried to talk again, he could not form words until he used his hand to move the chin and mouth up and down. "Mankind was my business," he continued, his rotted teeth clicking as they gnashed together. "Common welfare was my business. Charity, mercy, forbearance, and benevolence were all my business." Scrooge cowered in fear as Marley retied the bandage around his head. "Hear me," he implored Scrooge. "My time is nearly gone." Scrooge trembled and shook as he pleaded. I will, but don't be hard upon me, Jacob." Marley gave Scrooge a deathly, serious stare that penetrated deep into the old man's soul. "I am here to warn you that you yet have a chance of escaping my fate," he explained. "A chance of my procuring, Ebenezer." "You were always a good friend to me, Jacob," Scrooge replied gratefully. "You will be haunted by 3 spirits," said Marley's ghost. "That's my chance and hope," a frightened Scrooge replied. "I'd rather not." The ghost interrupted him with a blood-curdling cry. "Without their visits you cannot hope to shun the path I tread," he roared. Scrooge watched in horror as the ghost flipped its chains around his arms and floated backward toward the window. As he did, the window slowly began to open with a spine-chilling creak. "Expect the first tomorrow when the bell tolls 1, Marley said. Scrooge was terrified of what awaited him. "Couldn't I take them all at once and have it over with, Jacob?" As Marley floated past Scrooge, he looped one of his chains around the bottom of the frightened man's chair, slowly turning it toward the opening window. "Expect the second one the next night at the same hour, and the third upon the next night." when the last stroke of 12 has ceased to vibrate. The window was now completely open, and the room was filled with the echo of painful wails, the sounds of the regret of spirits who spent their lives pursuing the wrong goals. Marley floated out the window and levitated in the air outside Scrooge's house. Suddenly he yanked on the chain so violently that it pulled Scrooge over to the window, slamming his bony legs against the sill. "Look to see me no more," the ghost said, as he floated into the cold, dark night. Pinned against the wall by a chair, Scrooge looked out through the window and gasped. The sky was filled with thousands of moaning, sobbing phantoms. They were spirits like Marley, forever wandering aimlessly in restless haste to make up for lives ill spent. Every one of them was burdened with heavy chains. Some were even chained together. Partners in crime, forced to spend eternity with their shared shame. One in particular caught Scrooge's attention. It was the ghost of an old man who had a monstrous iron safe chained to his ankle. The man cried in agony as he looked at a still living woman and baby begging on the street. The two were extremely poor and in desperate need of money. The man had obviously ignored such people when he was alive, but now he wailed at his inability to help them from the grave. His greed had sentenced him to this eternity, and Scrooge could not help but see that his own life had been little different. Quickly, the street and sky filled with more spirits like these, millions of condemned souls shrieking in agony. Their cries rattled Scrooge, and he clamped his hands over his ears in a desperate attempt to block out the dreadful noise. Suddenly, a horrible, half-rotted phantom flew right toward him, screaming all the way. Scrooge lunged backward and toppled out of his chair, crashing down onto the floor. He scurried across the room and dived into his bed, pulling the blanket up over his head, wishing that he might suddenly awake and learn it had all only been a dream.